Hello, everyone. Welcome to Celsius 233, your go-to place for fiction book summaries. Today, we will enter the world crafted in Common Sense by Thomas Paine. Common Sense by Thomas Paine, published in 1776, is one of the most influential political pamphlets of the American Revolution. It advocated for the 13 colonies' independence from Britain, articulating Enlightenment ideals with sharp rhetoric. Paine's argument, rooted in the principles of natural rights, reason, and self-governance, helped galvanize public opinion in favor of independence. Written in plain, persuasive language, it played a crucial role in shifting colonial attitudes from reconciliation with Britain to outright rebellion. Plot summary. The sun had barely risen on the fledgling American colonies when the idea began to stir, an idea so radical and yet so inevitable that it soon swept across the land like a fire through dry fields. For too long, these 13 colonies had been yoked to the distant island of Britain, ruled by a king who neither understood nor cared for their well-being. The question that now pressed heavily on every heart was this: why remain shackled to a power that not only exploited but actively sought to suppress them? In this time of growing unrest, a voice emerged, clear, bold, and unwavering. It was the voice of common sense. With a directness that cut through the confusion of the age, it spoke the truth that many had sensed but few had dared to articulate. Government, it argued, is a necessary evil, but in its worst form, monarchy, it becomes intolerable. The colonies, long oppressed by Britain's arbitrary rule, had a natural right to break free. They had outgrown the need for a king and should govern themselves, forming a republic where the people, not some distant monarch, held the power. From the outset, the colonies had endured a complicated relationship with Britain. Initially, the mother country provided protection and trade opportunities, but as time passed, it became increasingly clear that this arrangement came at a significant cost. The colonies were treated not as partners, but as subordinates, taxed and controlled without having a say in their own governance. This imbalance reached a boiling point with the introduction of unjust laws and taxes, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, and finally, the imposition of soldiers to enforce Britain's will. These actions revealed a truth that could no longer be ignored. Britain viewed the colonies as little more than a source of wealth to be exploited. Amid this growing realization, it was the very nature of monarchy that drew the sharpest criticism. How absurd, how unnatural that one man, by accident of birth alone, should wield such power over millions. Paine ridiculed the notion of hereditary rule, pointing out the inherent flaws in a system where incompetence, cruelty, or ignorance could be passed down from generation to generation, simply because a man wore a crown. Kings were not divine. They were human, prone to the same vices as any other man, and yet the system placed them above reproach, allowing them to commit injustices on a grand scale. As the pamphlet's voice grew stronger, it began to paint an even starker contrast. The colonies, it declared, were perfectly capable of self-governance. In fact, they had been governing themselves in many respects for years. They had their own assemblies, their own laws, their own way of life. To remain tethered to Britain was to remain in a state of perpetual adolescence, never fully realizing their potential. Independence would allow them to create a new society, one built on liberty, equality, and justice. A society where the people had the power to shape their own destiny. But how, the doubters asked, could the colonies survive without Britain? Would they not be vulnerable to attack from other European powers, isolated and alone? To this, the voice of common sense responded with clarity and conviction. Britain's so-called protection, it revealed, was nothing more than self-interest. The British defended the colonies not for their sake, but to safeguard their own trade routes and geopolitical ambitions. The truth was, the colonies would be far better off on their own. Free to trade with other nations, they could build alliances and secure their own future, without being drawn into Britain's endless wars. With each argument, the voice grew more insistent, urging the colonists to see the world as it truly was. The time for reconciliation had passed. There was no hope of reforming the relationship with Britain, no middle ground that could be reached. Any attempt at compromise would only prolong the suffering, postponing the inevitable moment when the colonies would once again be forced into conflict with their oppressors. It was time to break free, completely and irrevocably. As the call for independence rang out, it was not only the present that was at stake, but the future as well. The pamphlet looked forward, imagining a day when America would stand tall among the nations, no longer a colony but a full-fledged, self-governing republic. It envisioned a land where freedom was the guiding principle, where men could live according to the dictates of their own consciences, and where the government existed not to oppress, but to serve. This was not just a dream, it was a duty. For the colonists, now embroiled in a fight for their very survival, the choice was clear. They must secure not only their own liberty, but that of future generations. The colonies had a unique opportunity, one that might never come again. The eyes of the world were upon them, watching to see whether they would seize this chance or let it slip away. Independence was not only a possibility, it was their destiny. To shrink from it now would be to consign themselves and their descendants to perpetual subjugation. With the wind of revolution at their backs, the colonists had only to summon the courage to take the final step. The voice of common sense was not just a call to arms, it was a call to a new way of thinking, to a new understanding of what it meant to be free. The time had come to discard the old, broken system and to create something entirely new, something that could stand as a beacon of hope for oppressed people everywhere. In the end, it was not Britain's tyranny that defined the colonies, but their response to it. In choosing independence, they chose not only to free themselves from external rule, but to embrace the very principles of liberty and equality. The break from Britain was not merely a political decision. It was the birth of a new nation, one founded on the radical idea that government should be of the people, by the people, and for the people. That's a wrap, but the journey doesn't end. Explore more books by Thomas Paine. You'll find the details in the description or on Celsius 233. Remember, while our summaries capture the essence, they can never replace the full experience of reading the book. If this summary intrigued you, consider diving into the complete story, buy the book, and immerse yourself in Thomas Paine's original work. Bye-bye, take care, have fun.